I should have seen it coming the day Daniel asked me to be his best man. We were sitting in that overpriced gastropub in Shoreditch, the one where they serve chips in little metal buckets and charge you 14 quid for it. And he looked me straight in the eye with that earnest expression he'd perfected over the years and said I was the brother he never had. I actually teared up a bit. God, what an idiot I was. This story doesn't start there, though. It starts 7 years earlier, in a cramped lecture hall at Imperial College where I first met Daniel Reed. We were both doing our masters in computer science, both sitting in the back row because we thought we were too clever for the front, both nursing hangovers from the post-grad mixer the night before. He cracked a joke about the professor's unfortunate comb-over. I laughed, and just like that, we were friends. That's how quickly your life can change. One laugh, one moment of connection, and you've just invited a parasite into your bloodstream. Daniel was charming in that effortless way some people are. Not traditionally handsome. He was shorter than me, a bit soft around the middle even back then, with thinning blonde hair he tried to style forward. But he had this energy about him. He made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room when he talked to you. He remembered details about your life, asked follow-up questions weeks later about things you'd mentioned in passing. He was clever, too, genuinely clever, though I'd later learn he was even better at making other people's clever ideas sound like his own. We became inseparable that year. Study partners, drinking buddies, wingmen at awful student clubs where the floors stuck to your shoes and the music was too loud to think. After graduation, we both landed jobs at different consulting firms. But we'd meet up every week, sometimes twice a week, to grab a pint and complain about corporate life. When I told him I was thinking about leaving my job to build my own startup, he was the first person to encourage me. When I actually did it 2 years later, he helped me workshop the idea, introduced me to potential investors from his network, even helped me build the initial pitch deck. That's the thing about Daniel. He was always there. Always supportive, always in your corner. Until suddenly, he wasn't. My company, Axiom Solutions, started in my cramped one-bedroom flat in Bethnal Green. The concept was straightforward but ambitious. AI-powered project management software that could predict bottlenecks, optimize resource allocation, and adapt to team working patterns in real time. I'd seen the need for it firsthand in consulting. Every company I'd worked with was drowning in inefficient processes, relying on outdated tools that created more problems than they solved. The first 2 years were brutal. I burned through my savings, maxed out credit cards, ate nothing but meal deal sandwiches and instant noodles. My girlfriend at the time left me because I worked 18-hour days and forgot her birthday 3 times. I barely slept. My sister would call and hear the exhaustion in my voice and beg me to just get a normal job again. But Daniel was there through all of it, checking in, bringing me takeaway when he knew I'd forgotten to eat, talking me down from the ledge when I wanted to give up. In year 3, things started to click. We secured our first major client, a mid-sized logistics company that needed help coordinating their operations across multiple warehouses. The software worked. Not perfectly, but well enough that they renewed their contract and referred us to 2 other companies. By year 4, we had 12 employees and an office in King's Cross that didn't smell like damp and desperation. By year 5, we were profitable, growing fast, and getting noticed by the industry press. Daniel had his own career trajectory. He'd moved from consulting to a business development role at a larger tech company, something in the fintech space. He was doing well, or so he said. Nice flat in Clapham, decent salary, the occasional exotic holiday he'd post about on Instagram. We still met up regularly, though less frequently now that we were both busy. I'd share my startup struggles and victories. He'd share his corporate frustrations, how he felt undervalued, how he wanted to do something more meaningful. About 6 months into year 5, he started asking more detailed questions about Axiom. Not the casual, "How's business?" questions friends ask, but specific things. What was our revenue? Who were our biggest clients? What was our client retention rate? How were we handling data security? What was our growth projection? At first, I didn't think anything of it. Daniel had always been interested in the business side of things, and I was proud of what we'd built. I wanted to share it with him. He asked about our technology stack. I told him. He asked about our pricing model. I showed him. He asked about our upcoming product roadmap. I sent him a copy of our internal strategy document because he said he was curious about how startups planned for scale. He asked to sit in on a client demo once, said he wanted to understand how we pitched. I let him. Looking back, I was basically handing him the keys to my house and showing him where I kept the valuables. The first crack appeared at a pub quiz night about 7 months later. A mutual friend from university, Sophie, mentioned she'd bumped into Daniel at some tech networking event. She made a joke about how he'd given an oddly familiar pitch about AI project management software. I laughed it off. Lots of companies were working in that space. It was a hot market. But something nagged at me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in bed with my laptop and started searching. It took me about 20 minutes to find it. A company called Zenith Systems, registered 4 months earlier. Founder and CEO, Daniel Reed. Product, AI-powered project management platform that predicts workflow bottlenecks and optimizes team efficiency. I read the description 3 times. Then I looked at their website. The interface was different, the branding was slicker than ours, but the core proposition was nearly identical. Some of the language on their features page was suspiciously close to phrases from our pitch deck, just reworded slightly. My hands were shaking. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was just coincidence. Daniel wouldn't do this, not to me, not after everything. I called him the next morning, tried to keep my voice casual. "Hey mate, Sylphie mentioned she saw you at that tech thing. Said you were pitching something?" There was barely a pause. "Oh yeah, just a side project I've been thinking about. Nothing serious yet, just exploring some ideas." "What kind of ideas?" "Business optimization stuff. Pretty different from what you're doing though. More focused on the corporate training side." He was lying. I could hear it in the way he rushed the words, the way he pivoted the conversation immediately to ask about my weekend plans. But I didn't call him out. Not yet. I told myself I needed more information. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I created a fake LinkedIn profile and started following Zenith Systems. I searched for any information I could find about their funding, their team, their technology. I lay awake at night, refreshing their sparse website, looking for updates. Then I found his Medium article, posted 3 weeks earlier, before I'd discovered the company existed. It was titled, "Building the Future of Project Management, Lessons from the Front Lines." In it, Daniel positioned himself as an industry thought leader, someone who'd spent years observing the inefficiencies in how teams work, and decided to build a solution from the ground up. He talked about his vision for predictive AI and workflow management. He discussed his approach to adaptive resource allocation. He outlined his philosophy on user-centered design. Every single idea was something we'd discussed, something I'd built, something I'd shared with him over hundreds of hours of conversation. The betrayal hit me like a physical thing, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I sat in my office after everyone had gone home, and I just stared at the screen, reading that article over and over again. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't parallel thinking. This was theft. I wanted to confront him immediately, drive to his flat, bang on the door, demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear that if I confronted him, he'd just lie again, and I'd have no way to prove anything. Maybe it was that I'd spent 5 years building a business on patience and strategy, and those instincts kicked in. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every conversation we'd had about Axiom, as much as I could remember. Every email I'd sent him with information about the company, every document I'd shared. I created a timeline of when I'd told him specific things and when those same concepts appeared in Zenith's materials. I also started watching him more carefully. We still met up every few weeks. I made sure of that, acted like nothing had changed. And I listened differently now. When he complained about how hard it was to get Zenith off the ground, I made sympathetic noises and asked detailed questions. He was surprisingly open, probably because he thought I was clueless. He told me about the investors he was pitching, the developers he was hiring, the clients he was pursuing. Some of those clients were companies I'd met with and decided not to pursue because they weren't the right fit. He was basically following my breadcrumb trail, going after the targets I'd already qualified. The rage I felt was unlike anything I'd experienced. I'd had my heart broken before, lost people I loved, failed at things I cared about. But this was different. This wasn't just hurt, it was violation. This was someone I'd trusted with everything, using that trust as a weapon, mining our friendship for advantage while smiling to my face. But I didn't let him see it. I smiled back. I bought rounds. I asked about his mom's health and his sister's new job. I was the same loyal friend I'd always been, because I realized something important. Anger makes you stupid, and I needed to be smart. 3 months after discovering Zenith, I hired a lawyer specializing in intellectual property. I showed her everything I'd compiled. She was honest with me. Unless Daniel had literally stolen code or copied documents verbatim, we had a weak case. Ideas aren't copyrightable. Similar products in the same market aren't illegal. And Daniel had been careful. Everything he'd built was different enough on the surface to avoid obvious theft, even if the strategic thinking behind it was lifted straight from my playbook. But, she said, leaning back in her chair, if he's used any confidential information you shared with him under a reasonable expectation of privacy, especially information that gave him a competitive advantage, that could be a breach of confidence. The problem is proving he used it and proving it caused you damage. I left her office feeling deflated. The law wasn't going to save me. But then again, I'd spent 5 years building a company in a market where half the startups fail in the first year. I knew how to play long games. I started making changes at Axiom, strategic ones. We accelerated our product development timeline, pushing features Daniel didn't know about. We pivoted our marketing to emphasize aspects of our platform that Zenith couldn't easily replicate without months of additional development. We doubled down on customer service and retention. I knew from experience that's where startups often dropped the ball. And I suspected Daniel, for all his people skills, wouldn't have the patience for the unglamorous work of keeping clients happy. I also started building something else, a trap. During one of our pub meetups, I casually mentioned that Axiom was exploring a partnership with a major enterprise client in the pharmaceutical sector. This was technically true. We'd had one introductory call that went nowhere. But I inflated it, made it sound like a done deal worth potentially 7 figures. I watched Daniel's eyes light up. He tried to play it cool, but I could see the hunger there. "That's incredible, mate," he said, raising his pint to me. "You've really made it." 2 weeks later, Zenith Systems announced they were expanding their focus to include pharmaceutical sector solutions. I almost laughed out loud when I saw the press release. Here's the thing about pharmaceutical companies. They have incredibly stringent data security and compliance requirements. They need software that's been rigorously tested, certified, and audited. They don't take chances on young startups unless those startups have serious infrastructure and credentials. Daniel didn't know this because he'd never worked in that space. I had. I knew it was a dead end for a company at Zenith's stage. I watched from a distance as he wasted 3 months chasing pharmaceutical clients who wouldn't give him the time of day. His blog posts from that period were telling. Lots of vague language about laying groundwork and building relationships that I recognized as code for getting absolutely nowhere. But I wasn't done. The trap wasn't just about wasting his time, it was about credibility. I'd learned through my network that Daniel had been telling investors that Zenith Systems had pioneered innovative approaches to AI project management. He was positioning himself as a visionary, a first mover in the space. This was laughable to anyone who knew the timeline, but investors often don't do deep diligence on young companies, especially if the founder is charismatic and the pitch is good. So I started making sure people knew the real timeline. Not aggressively, I'm not stupid, but strategically. When I gave talks at industry conferences, I'd mention how long Axiom had been developing our AI models, the years of iteration and learning. I'd share blog posts with timestamps showing our early prototypes and beta tests. I made sure our origin story was well documented and public. I also reached out to journalists who covered the tech startup scene. Not to badmouth Daniel, that would make me look petty, but to share Axiom's story. Local founder builds successful AI startup from bedroom in Bethnal Green. That kind of thing. Human interest angle, underdog story. The press loved it. And in those articles, the timelines were clear. Axiom had been in development since before Zenith existed. The whispers started. I'd hear them through mutual connections. People asking why Daniel's revolutionary product seemed so similar to one that had been on the market for years. Investors starting to ask harder questions about what made Zenith unique. But I still didn't confront him directly. I wanted him to succeed first, or more accurately, I wanted him to get close enough to success that the fall would hurt. Year 6 was good for Axiom. We brought in 2 major clients, expanded our team to 30 people, and secured Series A funding from a reputable VC firm. I was sleeping better, eating better, even started dating again. A graphic designer named Emma, who had no connection to tech and didn't give a damn about startups, which was refreshing. Daniel's year was harder. Zenith was growing, but slowly. He'd managed to secure some clients, but from what I could gather through the grapevine, the revenue wasn't impressive. He'd brought on a co-founder, a developer he'd worked with before, but I heard they were clashing over company direction. His blog posts became less frequent, less confident. We still met up occasionally, though it was down to maybe once every 2 months now. He'd always suggest it, never me. I think he was still mining for information, or maybe he genuinely missed the friendship, couldn't quite let go of it even as he was betraying it. There's something almost sad about that, in retrospect. During one of these meetups, about 18 months after I'd discovered Zenith, he told me he was getting married. Her name was Rachel. They'd been dating for a year. She worked in marketing at a fashion company. He asked me to be his best man. I said yes immediately, smiled broadly, ordered champagne, made a toast to his happiness. Inside, I felt nothing but contempt. How do you ask someone to stand beside you at the most important moment of your life while you're actively trying to destroy what they've built? But I was polite. More than polite, I was enthusiastic. I helped him plan the stag do, gave him advice on venues, even helped him write his vows when he got stuck. I played the role of best friend perfectly, because that's what the plan required. The wedding was in July, at a country house hotel in the Cotswolds. Expensive, tasteful, very Daniel. I gave a speech that had people laughing and crying, talking about our friendship, the journey we'd been on together, how proud I was of everything he'd accomplished. I meant none of it, but everyone believed it. Even Rachel hugged me afterward and said I was the brother Daniel had always wanted. The whole time, behind my smile, I was thinking about timing. See, the thing about revenge is that it's not about hurting someone in the moment. Any idiot can throw a punch or send an angry email. Real revenge is about patience. It's about waiting until they've built something they care about, until they've invested everything they have emotionally and financially, until they're so close to their dream they can taste it, and then you take it away. Zenith Systems had a breakthrough in month 23 of their existence. They landed a significant client, a retail chain with operations across Europe. The contract was worth about £400,000 over 2 years. Not huge by corporate standards, but for a young startup, it was transformative. Daniel wrote a blog post about it, barely concealing his excitement. Zenith was suddenly legitimate, suddenly a real player in the market. He called me to share the news. I congratulated him warmly, suggested we celebrate. We met at that same overpriced gastropub in Shoreditch, where he'd asked me to be his best man. He was glowing, talking about growth plans, hiring sprees, maybe even raising a proper funding round. "We're going to make it, Marcus," he said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice. "We're really going to make it." I raised my glass to him. "I never doubted you, mate." That's when I started phase 2. I'd been preparing for months. Every piece of information I'd gathered, every document I'd saved, every timeline I'd created, I'd organized it all into a comprehensive package. Not for a lawsuit, though my lawyer had reviewed it and confirmed we could potentially build a case for breach of confidence now that we could demonstrate actual competitive damage. No, this was for something more devastating than a lawsuit. This was for his investors. Daniel had recently closed a seed funding round with a small investment firm based in London. £750,000, enough to hire more people and accelerate development. The investors were 2 partners in their mid-40s, former management consultants who'd moved into early-stage tech funding. They had a decent reputation, and they weren't stupid. I requested a meeting with them, said I had information about one of their portfolio companies they might want to see. They were curious enough to take the call. I didn't tell them Daniel had stolen from me. I didn't have to. I just showed them the timeline. Here's when Axiom was founded. Here's our early product documentation, with timestamps. Here's when Daniel and I became friends. Here's the strategy document I shared with him, including metadata showing it was created 2 years before Zenith existed. Here's his company filing date. Here's his product description. Here's his blog post claiming to have pioneered these approaches. I presented it calmly, factually, like I was giving a business presentation, which, in a way, I was. "I'm not here to demand anything," I told them. "I just thought you should know that the innovative, first-mover advantage you invested in doesn't actually exist. Zenith is a follower product, built on strategic intelligence gathered from a competitor under the guise of friendship. The market position Daniel claimed to offer you is based on a false premise." The room was very quiet when I finished. One of the partners, a woman named Jennifer with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, looked at me for a long moment. "Why bring this to us?" she asked. "Why not just sue him?" "Because lawsuits are expensive and uncertain, and they take years," I said. "And because I'd rather his own investors understand who they're in business with. What you do with this information is up to you." I left them with copies of everything. Walked out of that glass-walled office in Mayfair feeling lighter than I had in 2 years. They called an emergency meeting with Daniel within 48 hours. I know because he called me right after, voice shaking, asking if we could meet urgently. I told him I was traveling for work. Could it wait until next week? He said it was important. I said, "Sorry, maybe coffee when I'm back?" He didn't tell me what the meeting was about, but I found out through a contact who knew one of Zenith's employees. The investors had confronted Daniel with the timeline, demanded an explanation. He'd apparently tried to claim that the similarities were coincidental, that he'd developed his ideas independently. But when they pressed him on the dates, on the specific phrases that appeared in both companies' materials, on the strategy document with my name on it, he'd fallen apart. The investors didn't pull out immediately. That would have been too clean. Instead, they did something worse. They stayed in, but they restructured the deal. New terms, less money, more oversight, mandatory approval on major decisions. They basically put Daniel on probation in his own company, and they installed one of their people as an advisor with significant operational control. His dream of being a founder CEO, of building an empire on his terms, was over. He was now a monitored employee in a company he'd started. But I still wasn't done. The thing about the tech startup world is that it's small. People talk. And when investors lose confidence in a founder, that news travels. Within a month, I started hearing that other VCs who'd been in talks with Zenith had gone cold. The promising funding round Daniel had been planning evaporated. The senior developer he'd been trying to recruit accepted a different offer. Zenith didn't collapse immediately. Companies rarely do. Instead, it started to deflate, slowly losing air. Clients renewed at lower rates than projected. Team members left for better opportunities. The blog posts stopped. The conference appearances dried up. And through it all, Daniel still hadn't confronted me directly. He knew, he had to know, that I was behind the investor's sudden change of heart. But he couldn't prove it, and maybe some part of him couldn't face it. Or maybe he was still hoping he could salvage the friendship, salvage something from the wreckage. We met for a drink about 4 months after my conversation with his investors. He looked terrible. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under his eyes. He talked vaguely about how tough business was, how investors were more demanding than he'd expected, how the market was harder than people realized. I listened sympathetically, made understanding noises, bought him a pint. "You're lucky," he said at one point, not quite looking at me. "You built Axiom the right way. Took your time, built a real foundation. I think I tried to grow too fast." The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. But I just nodded. Growth for the sake of growth is dangerous. You have to build something real first. He nodded slowly, staring into his beer. Yeah, I'm learning that." There was a long silence. I wondered if he'd confess, if he'd acknowledge what he'd done, ask for forgiveness, try to make amends. Part of me almost wanted him to, just to see what I'd feel. But he didn't. He finished his pint, made an excuse about an early meeting, and left. That was the last time we spoke for a while. Year 7 was transformational for Axiom. We launched a major product update that the industry press loved. We expanded into 3 new markets. Our revenue tripled. We won awards. I was invited to speak at conferences, write guest articles for industry publications, mentor young founders. I'd become what Daniel had pretended to be, an actual innovator, an actual thought leader, someone who'd built something real through years of hard work rather than stolen shortcuts. Zenith, meanwhile, was circling the drain. They'd lost their biggest client when the retail chain chose not to renew, citing performance issues. The team had shrunk from 12 people to 5. Daniel's co-founder left, and there were rumors of a nasty dispute over equity. The investors were reportedly trying to decide whether to pull the plug or try to sell the company for parts. I could have left it there. Daniel was beaten. His company was failing. His reputation in the industry was damaged. The future he'd tried to steal from me was gone. But there was one more thing I needed him to know. I waited until Zenith was at its absolute lowest point, the week after they'd announced restructuring on their blog, which everyone in the industry knew was code for desperation layoffs. Then I sent Daniel an email. Not long, just a few lines. Daniel, I think it's time we were honest with each other. I've known about Zenith since the beginning. Known what you did, how you did it, where the ideas came from. I've known for years. And I've watched, very carefully, as you tried to build something on a foundation of lies and theft. I wanted to see how far you'd get. The answer? Not very far. Success built on betrayal doesn't last, because it has no integrity underneath it. You didn't fail because the market was hard, or because investors were demanding. You failed because you tried to build a house on sand, and houses on sand always collapse. I hope it was worth it. I hope those years of looking me in the eye while robbing me blind, of using our friendship as camouflage while you pillaged my work. I hope all of that was worth ending up exactly where you are now. Broken, discredited, and alone. We won't be speaking again. Don't contact me. We're done. Marcus. I stared at that email for 10 minutes before sending it. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to remember the moment. The moment when he'd finally understand that he hadn't gotten away with anything. That I'd known all along. That every smile and every pint and every piece of friendly advice had been part of a longer game he didn't even know he was playing. I hit send. He tried to call me 17 times over the next 3 days. Left voicemails that started angry, became defensive, ended up pleading. I didn't listen to most of them. I read the transcripts my phone generated, just enough to confirm he was suffering, and then I deleted them. He sent emails, long ones, trying to explain, to justify, saying I didn't understand the pressure he'd been under, the opportunity he couldn't pass up, how he'd never meant to hurt me, saying he'd always valued our friendship, always cared about me, how business was business, but we were brothers. I set up a filter to automatically archive anything from his address. The final message I saw from him, and only because it came from a different email, his personal one instead of his work one, was short. You're right. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, you were the best friend I ever had. I destroyed that. I know I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I know what I lost was worth more than anything I tried to gain. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry. I felt nothing reading it. Or maybe not nothing. Maybe a distant, cold satisfaction, like looking at a problem you've finally solved. I didn't reply. Zenith Systems officially shut down 3 months later. The investors managed to sell some of the code and intellectual property to a larger company for a fraction of what they'd invested. Daniel walked away with nothing. His reputation in the startup world was destroyed. No one would fund him. No one would hire him for anything significant. I heard through mutual connections that he'd taken a job as a senior product manager at a mid-sized company, a role well below what he'd had before starting Zenith. He'd moved out of his nice flat in Clapham, presumably to somewhere cheaper. His marriage, from what I gathered, was under serious strain. Rachel had been supportive through the business struggles, but learning that her husband had built his company on betraying his best friend, that apparently was harder to forgive. I should probably feel guilty about that part. She was innocent in all this. But I don't. Actions have consequences. Daniel made choices, and those choices affected everyone connected to him.
That's not my fault.
Axiom continues to thrive. We're at 70 employees now. Last month, we closed a Series B funding round that valued the company at £45 million. We're expanding internationally, opening an office in Berlin. I've been able to pay my mum back for the money she lent me in those early, desperate days, with interest she didn't want, but I insisted on. I bought my sister and her husband a nice weekend trip to Paris for their anniversary. I still work too much. Still probably don't sleep enough. Still occasionally forget to eat proper meals when I'm deep in a problem. But the business is real now, stable, built on actual innovation and actual relationships with clients who trust us because we've earned it. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about Daniel. Not often, but sometimes. I wonder if he lies awake too, replaying different decisions, imagining how things could have been different if he'd just been honest. If he'd come to me and said, "Marcus, I think there's room in this market for both of us. Can we talk about me building something in this space?" Would I have been supportive? Would I have helped him? I honestly don't know. Maybe. Probably even. Because that's what friends do. They support each other's ambitions. They help each other succeed. They make room for each other to grow. But he didn't do that. He chose deception. He chose to take what I'd built and try to pass it off as his own vision. He chose to look me in the eye, accept my trust, and use it as a weapon. And so I chose to destroy him. People sometimes ask me about Daniel, mutual friends who remember when we were inseparable. I tell them we drifted apart, got busy with our respective companies. You know how it is. They nod knowingly. Professional relationships are like that. I never tell them the truth. There's no benefit in it. And honestly, the full story makes me look calculating in ways that might make people uncomfortable. Better to let them think it was a natural growing apart, not a deliberate dismantling. The truth is something I carry alone. That I spent 3 years methodically destroying someone I once cared about. And I did it so thoroughly that by the end, there was nothing left for him to rebuild with. I didn't just want him to fail. I wanted him to understand, deeply and completely, that his failure was the direct result of his betrayal. I wanted the lesson to be unambiguous. Was it worth it? I ask myself that sometimes. The answer is always yes. Not because revenge felt good. Honestly, it didn't feel like much of anything. Not elation, not satisfaction in the moment. Just a kind of cold completion, like finishing a difficult project. It was worth it because some betrayals can't be forgiven, shouldn't be forgiven. Because letting people steal from you without consequences doesn't make you noble. It makes you a victim. Because Daniel needed to learn that actions have prices. And the price for what he did was everything he tried to build on the foundation of his theft. I don't feel bad about it. I probably should, shouldn't I? That's what people expect. The hero is supposed to learn that revenge is hollow, that forgiveness is the real path to peace, that letting go is stronger than holding on. But I don't feel that way. Maybe I'm not the hero of this story. Maybe I'm just someone who got stolen from and decided that wasn't acceptable, who had the patience and the resources to do something about it. Axiom's success isn't about Daniel anymore. It stopped being about him years ago. The company succeeds because we built something real, because we iterate and improve and actually care about solving our clients' problems. Daniel is just a footnote now, a cautionary tale I'll never tell publicly, but will always remember privately. Last month, I was at an industry conference in Manchester. I was scheduled to give a keynote about sustainable growth strategies for tech startups. As I was reviewing my notes before going on stage, I saw him. Daniel, standing near the back of the room. He looked older, grayer, smaller somehow. He wasn't registered for the conference. I'd checked the attendee list earlier in the week like I always do. He must have bought a day pass just to hear me speak. Our eyes met across the room. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. Just a distant recognition, like seeing a building you used to live in that you have no particular feelings about anymore. I walked onto that stage and gave my talk about integrity in business, about building companies that last because they're founded on real value rather than shortcuts, about how sustainable success requires patience, authenticity, and the courage to do things the hard way when the easy way is tempting. I never looked at the back of the room, but I knew he was there, listening. Understanding, maybe, that he was the case study I'd never name, but would always remember. After my talk, I left through the speaker exit. Didn't stay for the networking reception. Didn't give him a chance to approach me, to try to speak, to attempt some kind of reconciliation I had no interest in. The last time I checked, and yes, I still check occasionally, though less frequently now, Daniel was still at that product manager job. Still in London. Still married, though his social media presence is much quieter than it used to be. No more thought leadership blog posts, no more industry insights, no more ambitious declarations about changing the world. He's ordinary now. Exactly what he was, so.